Tristan here, and listen, I want to share with you all just some lesson plan essentials, just some things I want you all to consider as you start planning your lessons out. These are things both virtually and for in-person classes as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. But before I give you all those, I want to share just a quick story with you all about why these things are just so important, or why these essentials are just so important. So when I was at East Carolina University, that's where I did my undergrad, I had a social studies professor. Her name was Dr. Gallagher. I'll never forget her, who gave us this really, it was a perfect question. I'm going to ask you all this question in a second. Because a lot of times what happened is I was a social studies was one of my concentrations. So a lot of times what would happen is we would all build these super cute lesson plans where, we might have our kids, making hats, or, coloring maps or something like that. And she would tell us, this is a really good assignment or whatever. But then she would ask us, is it cute or does it count? And what she meant when she said that was, is this just some type of activity that we're going to do to kind of showcase, that we're talking about this thing? Or is this an activity that's going to count toward the student knowledge? Is it something that's going to, construct some new knowledge for them? Are they going to be able to apply some form of knowledge to this? Or are they just kind of going through an activity for the sake of going through it? So she asked us that. That was my senior year that I took her class. And it has stuck with me throughout my entire profession so far. So shout out to Dr. Gallagher. Thank you for that question. I don't think you realize how much of an impact it's had on my instruction. So there are five lesson plan essentials that I want to share with you all. And I want to go ahead and get started with this first one. So this first lesson plan essential is the standards. So with that, guys, you want to make sure that your lesson plans are aligned to whatever state standards that you all are in. So for me, I'm in North Carolina, so that's the North Carolina Common Core state standard. So I want to make sure that whatever my objective is for this lesson, that the activities that we're going to be doing inside of that lesson all align to some part of that standard that I'm going to be focusing on. Alongside this, it's really important that we as teachers and as content area specialists, we know our standards so that we know that when we're working on a particular activity, that it's going to be aligned to that standard. So that first thing that you want to consider here is just, making sure that your entire activity or your objectives for your lesson are standard aligned and they go with the standards. That second thing that you all are going to want to consider are your do nouns. So we call these things a billion names. I heard them being called smart starts. I heard them being called your do nouns, of course, and I call them something else, and of course my mind is drawing blank while I'm recording the video. But whatever you call it, how are you getting your students started when they come into your class? So your do nows are important for multiple reasons, y'all. For me, most importantly, they're important because they require some type of consistency, or they add consistency to your class. Kids know when I come into Mr. Hunter's class, I'm either doing a journal entry, or I'm doing a grammar warm-up, or I'm doing a constructive response. I'm doing something, EOC prep, inside of Mr. Hunter's class when I come in there within that first 10 minutes. And it gives them something, or it creates some structure, and it gives them something to look forward to, whether they like it or not. So that second thing is going to be your do nows. How are you going to get your scholars their minds working and their wheels turning? And that can be multiple things. That can be, a review of yesterday's lesson. It could be, a preview into today's lesson. It can be, you asking them their opinion about a particular thing that y'all might be studying in class, or you asking them their opinion about, how they think class is going. Something to get the scholars' minds turning, just a little bit to get them warmed up. Because this third thing I'm about to introduce to you all is what I'm going to refer to as our engagement piece. So this is where a teacher, us as the teachers, we're coming in and we're engaging our students. Now, I've heard people call this a billion things. My favorite thing to refer to it as is what we call a concept development. So how are you developing this concept that you're studying with your scholars? How are you getting that scholars to actually understand or get them kind of like hooked into this concept. One of my favorite things that I've seen someone do was in a drama class, they were getting ready to study a musical, and the teacher opened up the class by singing one of the key songs from the musical. And I was like, oh my God, that's an amazing way to like hook the scholars into this lesson. So inside this engage piece or slash this concept development piece, this is where you're introducing the concept to the students. You're breaking it down. This is where that direct instruction has to take place. So this is where the teacher is telling the students, the definitions of, the concept that they're studying. They're giving the students their background knowledge about this. They're also going through and they're giving them, some type of steps. So, in math, if I'm doing, listen, this is a reach. If I'm doing like a quadratic equation, I'm going to give my students the steps to how to do that quadratic equation. In history, if I'm looking at the background of the Civil War, I'm going to make sure I start, by giving my students some key terms and events that we're going to start segueing into and diving deeper into once we get further into the lesson. In a science class, if I'm going over the how we form a hypothesis, this is where I'm going to give those explicit steps about how we form a hypothesis. In English class, if I'm looking or if I'm studying main idea, this is where I'm showing my students those steps as to how we develop the main idea inside of this. So the key thing that you all want to remember inside of this engage piece is that this is where we as teachers give our students the most explicit and direct form of instruction so that it's clear what we want them to do, how we want them to do it, and they just understand, or it's a clear reflection of what we're going to be having them do in this next part. So this fourth thing, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call our independent practice. And inside that independent practice is exactly what it sounds like. After we go through our engagement, and sorry, that's one more part I forgot from the engagement. So in the engagement, not only are we introducing the scholars to this concept, but then we're also guiding them through in some form of a guided practice. And we're using that guided practice to kind of help them build that skill up as well. And then inside that next one, that independent practice, this is where they're going to get the chance to actually build that skill on their own or continue to develop that skill on their own. And this is where you as a teacher, you're either walking around and you're checking, doing your formative assessments, you're checking in on these students, you're checking in on those students to see exactly who gets it and who doesn't. And then you're coming up with a plan as they're working on this. Now, I've seen independent practices be done a billion ways. You can do it in a group setting. You can pair scholars up. You can also have it be independent as well. So while the name of it is independent, it's really just independence from the teacher, not necessarily independence from the students or other scholars or their peers. And then that last piece is the closure. So that's our fifth thing, y'all, is the closure. And this is the piece where I often see teachers leave off, is the closure piece. And it's super important that we don't leave off the closure, because this is how we kind of wrap the lesson up. And this is a lot of time for the students. A lot of times for the students, this is where those connections are made. And this is kind of where we draw that clear connection between, me setting the objective at the beginning of class and then me explaining to them, this is how they do it. Or better yet, them explaining to you, this is how we met that objective. So through that closure activity, whether that be an exit ticket, whether that be, open dialogue conversation, whether it be, some type of activity, some type of practice that they're doing with a particular skill, regardless of what the closure looks like, there has to be some type of closure there to kind of like seal the lesson in, and kind of help the students make those connections. So those are those 5 elements that I consider, lesson plan essentials. And there are also like 2 other things that I want to make sure we consider here as we're developing our lesson plans for our students. That first thing is the level of rigor. So I won't dive into this because this is going to be another series later on. But when we talk about rigor, we want to make sure that we're challenging our students, but we're challenging them in a way that we like to call productive struggle. So we want to make sure that we aren't just giving them 50 pages to read, but instead we can give them 10 pages to read, and those 10 pages have them, dissect that a little bit more and dive deeper into it. So we want to provide rigorous instruction because we want to give scholars the opportunity to think critically. And this happens across the board. This isn't something that just happens in our English classes or our math classes or our science classes or our social studies classes, or our art classes or our philosophy class. Instead, this is something that should be happening all across the board, and teachers throughout the building should be working together to make your scholars, think critically and use those critical thinking skills. Another thing I think is just, these are just honorable mentions here. We already went over our 5 basics, but another honorable mention would be those collaboration skills. Are we giving our scholars the opportunity to actually engage and collaborate with each other in the way they would in the real world? So, and I hate using the term the real world, but it's so important because we don't want to miss that collaboration piece. So you want to make sure that when your lessons apply for, or when the opportunity comes within your lessons, that you're allowing your scholars to actually collaborate with each other and get to work together so that they can build those skills of being able to have, what do they call it? Civil discourse and all of those other things, and those problem solving skills, and build those critical thinking skills together, because that's one of the best ways to do it is through collaboration. And then that last thing, guys, and this one is a super important one for me, and I should have made it like my 6th point if I was making it one of my lesson plan essentials, is that we want to make sure that our lesson plans are student-centered. As teachers, and I am a teacher, so I can speak from this, it's so easy to make our lesson plans, what we want to do, what's easy for us, what's the most convenient for us, and just like what I prefer. But what we have to remember as teachers is that, I've already been in the classroom. I took 10th grade English 2, I took Math 1 already. So it's important for us to make sure that we frame our lessons around our students in the way that our students learn, in the way that our students can be the most productive, not necessarily how we do it. So those are our lesson plan essentials, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to jump into this a little bit more in another video, but I hope you guys found this introduction useful. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye, y'all.